Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's educational webinar with Cancer Support Community Los Angeles and Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the Program Manager at CSE South Bay, and I welcome you to this workshop titled How Plant-Based Diets Can Support Survivorship. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, CSE LA and CSE South Bay are premier nonprofit organizations providing vital social and emotional support to families facing cancer, including patients, caregivers, and their loved ones, all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs such as this one. We'll provide information about our programs and services at the conclusion of this workshop. If you'd like to hear more about our services or watch past workshops, please visit our website at cancersupportla.org or csesouthbay.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, we ask you to keep your microphone muted to eliminate any distracting background noise. You may, however, enter your questions into the chat feature found at the bottom of the Zoom window at any time. We may not be able to get to all your questions today, but we'll get to as many as possible. Marissa Minderler is a registered dietitian who currently works as both an inpatient and outpatient clinical dietitian at Torrance Memorial. Graduating from USC with her master's in nutrition, health, and longevity, and a bachelor's in kinesiology, she has always had an interest in the role of nutrition in weight management, fitness and performance, and in women's health. Most recently, she has taken to exploring the role of nutrition in cancer and how it can assist with prevention, management of treatment, and survivorship. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Marissa Minderler.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to deliver the presentation to you. And I'm going to share my screen so you can see our presentation today. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, it looks like that is a go. Perfect. All right. So thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is Marissa Minderler. I've been working as a registered dietitian at Torrance Memorial for a couple years now, really involved in the oncology space and always really appreciate educating patients and the community on how nutrition can play a very vital role in cancer prevention, as well as through survivorship. So today our presentation is about plant-based diets and how we can cater those to support survivorship. So these are going to be our topics today. Excuse me. We're going to talk about plant-based diets and define them, because I know that can be a little confusing sometimes. There's a bit of nuance, and sometimes even just the terminology of what defines a plant-based diet can be a little bit misleading and confusing. We'll also talk about how to understand the role of antioxidants and phytonutrients in health. Then we'll go on to discuss research and specifically how plant-based diets can support survivorship. And most importantly, we'll discuss tips for incorporating more plants into your daily diet. So, what's the point of learning all of this if you're not able to apply it? So let's define plant-based plant-based, okay? A plant-based diet really typically describes an eating pattern that's, high in plants, right? Plant-based, right? Eating pattern that's high in plants. But there really is little to no animal products that would be consumed through this diet, okay? Some of them can include animal byproducts. So these could be things like honey. In some cases, it could even be things like, if you wear leather or if you wear fur, those kinds of things. But another term that we're starting to see is called plant forward, okay? And this has, some mixed interpretations, but really the combination of plant-based or plant forward more or less is semantics, okay? So vegetarian diets can be considered plant forward, right? Because they emphasize plants as the foundation, right? We know there's a lot of plant consumption at the base of the diet, but there are still some diets that might incorporate small amounts of animal products, okay? So we've all heard of lacto-vegetarians, right? Lacto means dairy or milk, right? So these types of vegetarians will consume dairy products only, okay? There's also ovo-vegetarians, which ovo stands for egg. So these types of vegetarians, plants, of course, are the base of their diet, but they do consume egg or egg products. There's a combination of the two, which could be a lacto-ovo vegetarian. They consume both dairy and egg products. And then there's also pescatarian. So pescatarian means fish or seafood. And sometimes pescatarians are a little bit more specific, where they only consume fish and the rest is just plants. But there's also an understanding that if you consume fish, you might also consume eggs as well as dairy products. So there's sort of this, tier of animal product intake. Now the word vegan, okay, we've heard of vegan, right? So a vegan diet is plant-based, but plant-based doesn't necessarily mean vegan, right? So a vegan diet is really a diet that is devoid of all animal products as well as animal byproducts, okay? But just because someone is vegan doesn't necessarily mean that they don't consume even some forms of processed foods, right? Or other sorts of refined foods, okay? We've seen a huge increase in, vegan cheese, vegan meat products. There's a lot of ways to now bake things that are vegan. There's vegan ice cream, right? Which typically is made from, coconuts, or there's stuff that has oat milk. So there's a lot of semantics involved with labeling things vegan or labeling things plant-based, right? But just because something is vegan doesn't necessarily mean that it is healthy or even that it is not processed, okay? Now, what we kind of want to get away from, again, with the semantics is the titles, and we really want to focus on a whole food, plant-forward diet. Okay, really what that means is we want to consume foods that are as close to their natural form as possible and not heavily processed. Okay, so this concept of whole food and plant forward really marries the concept of eating mostly plants, limiting any sort of processed or refined products. Okay, whole food plant forward could also include some animal products and their byproducts. But once again, really the base of this diet is you're going to consume fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, etc. All of these things. So I found this really nice food pyramid. Okay, there were a lot of years ago we had this other food pyramid, but we're gonna take it back and we're gonna create sort of this new food pyramid based on a whole food plant forward diet. Okay, so you see there again at the base of this pyramid, we've got colorful fruits and colorful vegetables and a huge variety of them, right? A lot of them, a lot. Okay, this is the base of the diet. Then we have whole grains. This could include, things like rice and barley, oats, quinoa, millet, different types of pastas, right? Also are incorporated here. Breads would fit in here. And then we've got things like your protein-based foods, so like tofu, beans. Okay, these are essential if you're going to be consuming a whole food plant-forward diet, because these are high sources of protein. Okay, we also have nuts and seeds. Up towards the top there, we've got herbs, spices, and plant oils. So these are things like olive oil, rosemary, basil, all of these aromatics, right? And then if you do choose to be a vegetarian and still consume some animal products, we would put those towards the top as being that these are not going to be the foundation of your diet, but more the supplement into your diet, right? So you might include yogurt and cheese and dairy and eggs. And then this one didn't have fish, so added the little fish right there at the top. Okay, so let's go through some stats about how people are doing in the United States with fruits and vegetables. Okay, the most recent survey from the CDC was 2019. We expect to have another one come out next year. They do it every 5 years. But in 2019, the CDC found that 12.3% and 10% of adults met the fruit and vegetable intake recommendations. Okay, so what that means is 12 people out of 100 are eating enough fruit, and only 10 people out of 100 are eating enough vegetables. Excuse me. So fruit intake, pardon me, 1 second. So as far as fruit intake goes, okay, the recommendations were actually the highest from Hispanic adults. Okay, so 16% of Hispanic adults met the fruit intake, okay? Now, it was the lowest amongst males, okay? Lowest amongst males, that's not good. Okay, that means only 10 out of 100 men are eating fruit. That's not good. Okay, now we also have the vegetable intake, okay? It was the highest among adults that were above age 51, but still only 12.5%, okay? And then it was the lowest among adults with lower income. Now, we can go into a whole long story about that situation and what relates to that. And we know that there are socioeconomic factors that come into play here, but we'll save that for another conversation. All right, so let's talk about why we really need plants. Okay, why are plants essential to our diet? Plants contain antioxidants and phytonutrients. I hope people have heard these terms before, okay? But where do they come from? What are they? Well, antioxidants are these compounds that bind to free radicals. Okay, free radicals are things that are produced as a result of various metabolic processes. And we know that these antioxidants can actually prevent damage to our DNA, our cell membranes, and other really important structures like the mitochondria. Okay. Now, a phytonutrient is really another compound that is also found in a plant. And we know that these different compounds can actually support our immune health. They prevent tumor growth, and they also assure that there are various functions of our vital organ systems. So a phytonutrient can be an antioxidant, but an antioxidant isn't necessarily a phytonutrient, okay? So it's kind of like the rectangle and square dilemma. So we need both, okay? And we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail what these things are. So the AICR, which is the American Institute for Cancer Research, okay, they recommend consuming a diet that is high in whole food and plant-based because of the antioxidant and phytonutrient compounds that are present in these fruits and vegetables, okay? There's also fiber that exists in plants, okay? Fiber is not found in any animal products, okay? Fiber is only found in plants, okay? Beans, whole grains, fruits, vegetables. That is the only place fiber exists, okay? And we need a ton of fiber in our diet, not only for gut health, but it's also been shown to help with weight management and various other chronic conditions. So these are some crazy names, but these are some of the antioxidants and phytonutrients that you're going to find in these colorful fruits and vegetables. We've all heard of vitamin C. We've all heard of vitamin E. We've heard of vitamin A, okay? Some of these other things maybe you haven't heard of before, but selenium, okay? Astaxanthin, glutathione. There's glucosinolates, okay? And then on the right side, we've got all of these other things, carotenoids, lycopene, okay? This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but we're going to talk about some of these in the next couple slides. So let's go through some details about these colors, okay? So I mentioned on that list lycopene, okay? Lycopene is a very powerful red color, okay? It gives these tomatoes, the strawberries, the beets, the bell peppers. It gives them their color, okay? And it's actually best absorbed when it's cooked or consumed with some kind of fat, okay? So tomatoes with olive oil, right? Something really simple like that, okay? And we know that lycopene specifically can help reduce any sort of risk of prostate cancer, okay? Red colored fruits and vegetables also contain something called nitric oxide. Okay, nitric oxide is what we call a vasodilator. Okay, it's something that can improve circulation and cardiovascular function. Orange, yellow, and even sometimes the greens, okay, they also have something called carotenoids. Okay, carotenoids are converted into vitamin A, okay, and these are found in our orange colored veggies, okay? So we've got oranges, sweet potatoes, butternut squash, and we have bell peppers as well. Now, these are also absorbed best with a source of fat, and they may have particularly positive effects in reducing breast cancer risk as well as recurrence. Oops. Oopsies. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, next we have our flavonoids, okay? Flavonoids are a class of antioxidants, okay? And these are found in berries, tea, coffee. It's also found in Brussels sprouts, leafy greens, okay? And there's a subcategory of flavonoids that are called isoflavones, okay? Isoflavones are found in soy-based products, okay? And we know that isoflavones have a powerful impact on protection against hormone receptor positive breast cancer, okay? So if we think about survivorship, if you've had breast cancer, okay, still consuming soy products is healthy and beneficial for reducing any sort of risk of recurrence. Okay, green colored vegetables also have something called lutein and zeaxanthin. Okay, big words. These are in dark leafy greens. Okay, they play a role in our eye health. They play a role in reducing cardiovascular risk. Okay, and these are also actually absorbed best with a source of healthy fat. Again, something like olive oil, avocados, salmon, those kinds of things. Okay, and our last two. Okay, these two are primarily found in what we say cruciferous vegetables. So sulforaphane as well as glucosinolates, okay? These are really powerful and very strong free radical scavengers, okay? What they do is they grab onto these reactive species that come into our body, and they actually prevent any sort of damage to our DNA, okay? So these are found, broccoli, broccoli sprouts, cabbage, kale, all of these sorts of really cruciferous vegetables. Oh my gosh, sorry guys. Keep clicking outside my screen. Oh. Okay. All right, our last two. Okay, we have anthocyanins, tannins, and phenolic acids. Okay, again, big words, right? These are found in our colorful blueberries, our cherries, beans and lentils, red cabbage, walnuts, and beets as well. And we know that all of these compounds are known to really positively support brain health, and they also can support the reduction of blood pressure, okay? Allium and allicin, these are what we call our aromatics, okay? These are found in things like onions and leeks and garlic, and these have really powerful antimicrobial properties. And a little fun fact about these is so allium is converted into allicin, okay? And it has to be activated. So to activate this compound, to get the most benefit at it, you actually want to chop it, okay? So you're chopping your onion, you're chopping your leeks, you're chopping your garlic, and then you stop. And you wait for about 5 to 10 minutes, and this actually activates the enzyme so that you get a little bit more out of your broccoli, or excuse me, out of your onions, out of your garlic. Okay, so we talked a lot about the colors. Okay, we saw that a lot of these antioxidants and phytonutrients positively affected our cardiovascular health. They can also reduce risk of infections and things like this, right? So what does it say though? What does research now say about plant-forward diets and survivorship. So how can we take all of these antioxidants and how does this translate into research for survivors? So we're going to go over 4 studies. Okay, I'm going to briefly touch on some of them and I'm going to go into a little bit more details on others. So there was a meta-analysis from 2016. Okay, a meta-analysis is where it takes a variety of different randomized controlled trials, compiles all of them together, and it analyzes what effects were found in these studies. So a meta-analysis found that out of almost 210,000 cancer survivors, that higher intakes of vegetables and fish were inversely associated with overall mortality, meaning the more vegetables that you consumed, and likely if you had fish in your diet, you had a decreased risk of dying. Okay, that's pretty significant, right? A decreased risk of dying. And this is again after you've already gone through treatment and as a survivor. Okay, so this just goes to show eating vegetables and potentially fish is extremely beneficial for reducing any sort of risk of death. Another diet review of a little more than 3,500 breast cancer survivors found that higher intakes of plants was inversely correlated with all-cause and non-breast cancer associated mortality. Again, similar concept as the previous study, but this was concentrated primarily towards breast cancer survivors. And we found that more plants, more variety in the diet had a decreased risk of death, a decreased risk of death. However, there was no effect that this found on reducing total risk of recurrence. So I would like to point out that while we know that we can for sure prevent or decrease likelihood of early mortality, it reducing our total potential for recurrence is complicated. Okay, cancer is a very complicated problem, and our body, there are a lot of factors that come into play with why somebody may get cancer. Okay, and there is no foolproof way to prevent it 100%. Okay, but we can certainly reduce our risk. Okay, but we know that eating more plants is associated with decreased risk of death, but there are other factors that may come into play with total recurrence risk. Okay, this third study is a little in depth, so I'm going to try and explain it as best I can. So a diet review of around 70,000 cancer survivors compared their diet quality over a 10-year span, and they compared them to 4 different types of dietary index patterns. Okay, I listed them there in the parentheses. So the HEI is the healthy eating index. The AHI is the alternate healthy eating index. AMED is the alternate Mediterranean diet. And the DASH is called the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stopping Hypertension. So they took these cancer survivors, they obtained what's called a food frequency questionnaire, and they did this over a 10-year span. And they compared these survivors' food frequency questionnaire answers to these 4 different diet patterns, okay? And what they found is that the higher that someone scored as being close to the ideal pattern, okay, as close to the healthy eating index, as high as they could in the alternate healthy eating index, as high as they were in the Mediterranean and the DASH diet, okay, they found that all of these patterns were inversely correlated with mortality. Once again, if you followed a diet that is high in plants and low in animal products or processed foods, then you had a decreased likelihood of death. Okay, and this is a pretty large number. I mean, 70,000 is a pretty large scale assessment, and over a 10-year span nonetheless, right? Because we know that certain cancers have increased risk of promoting secondary cancers, right? So we ultimately, as survivors, want to be completely cancer-free forever after this, right? So we know that we can find that consuming more plants is only beneficial for survival. And our final study that I want to highlight here is this was in about 3,500 prostate cancer survivors, okay? They found that men who followed a predominantly plant-based diet after completing their treatment actually had better scores for urinary and bowel symptoms, they had improved sexual function, and they actually had improved hormone and vitality levels even after that. I don't recall the total length of this, but it was definitely something to pay attention to. Okay. All right. I know we've moved through quite a bit of information at this point. So now we're going to talk about practical tips for how to incorporate more plants into your diet. Okay, so we saw that, research showed that anybody who is in survivorship, adding more plants into your diet is only beneficial for reducing your risk of death. Even certain cancer therapies can increase cardiovascular risk after therapy has completed. Okay, so we saw that a lot of the intake of antioxidants and plant-based foods was associated with a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay, and that also increases just with age. We know that cancer can happen at a young age, but it tends to happen in older populations. So we have this double increase here, right? So we want to consume more plants. So let's talk about the best way that you can start doing that. So remember this pattern. Okay, remember this pyramid that we talked about earlier, right? Fruits and vegetables were the foundation of this. We have our whole grains, okay? No avoiding carbohydrates. There's absolutely no way to avoid carbohydrates if you want to do this, okay? We've got our plant-based food, or our protein-based foods here in the middle, right? Our tofu, our beans, nuts and seeds, and then we've got our flavorful herbs and spices. And if you choose to be vegetarian and still consume some animal products, you've got those options at the top there. So tip number one, okay, the first thing that I recommend to people when you're trying to incorporate more plants is really starting with awareness, okay? Let's generate some awareness around what am I doing now, okay? I also want to really highlight, what are the foods that I like? Because maybe I like these foods, but I haven't found a way to implement all of them just yet, okay? So I found this online and I really like this checklist. It just breaks things up into really simple categories, okay? And I always start with, what are the foods that I eat right now? Okay, let's just create awareness around what are the foods on these in these categories that I eat right now on a weekly basis. Okay, so how many fruits do I typically get out of varieties in the week? Okay, how many vegetables do I get at this point across my week? Maybe I sort of, stick to what I know, right? And maybe I only have, a handful of vegetables across the week. Okay. Maybe I don't have beans, or maybe I eat multiple different types of beans, okay? So we just want to start checking first, what foods we eat in all of these categories to start. Once you've checked this list, okay, once you want to assess your diversity. Okay, so we saw that, we need different colors across the diet, right? We want different colors of plants each week, okay? So now let's assess our diversity. Let's say, okay, am I getting red? Am I getting orange? Am I getting greens? Maybe I'm not getting anything, right? So the goal is to actually consume 30 different plants per week, 30, okay? And these can come from mixed sources. Once again, you can get these sorts of things if you have granola, right? You can get these sorts of things if you have mixed fruit cups, right? But our goal is to meet that 30 plant diversity every week. Tip number two, okay? So once you've sort of created that awareness around what you're eating, okay, we want to look and say, okay, where do I fall in that 30 category? And okay, how can I start to bump that number up? Maybe I'm hitting 12, okay? Maybe I'm hitting 20, okay? How can I increase that a little bit? So just bit by bit, okay? So an easy place to start is to start by adding a vegetable at your dinner time, okay? A lot of people tend to just, do a protein, a starch, and maybe they have a vegetable, okay? Some people don't, but maybe they have a vegetable, okay? If you kind of follow this traditional pattern, start with your protein, get your starch, and now try to add at least 1 or 2 different vegetables at that meal. So for example, if you have maybe 3 ounces of fish, and then you mix that with some whole grain pasta and you have broccoli, that's a pretty solid start, but let's try adding a couple more veggies in there. Let's try adding some asparagus. Maybe you can add some spinach or some kale, right? Or you can add tomatoes, right? Start by adding just additional vegetables to one of your meals that already have a vegetable. Okay, easy place to start. Tip number 3, okay, once you start to get this, you say, okay, like I'm feeling pretty good. I'm starting to add more veggies everywhere. I'm feeling good. Now I think I'm ready to start pulling back on some of my animal protein intake. Okay, now I think I'm going to try some plant-based versions of some of the animal-based dishes that I already eat. So if maybe for breakfast I make an egg scramble, I'm going to try a tofu scramble. Okay, it doesn't have to be every time, but I'm just going to try it. I'm going to swap it up and see if I can switch to a tofu scramble. Okay, if you make meatloaf, okay, try swapping it out for a plant-based version of the loaf. That could be with lentils and mushrooms. Okay, a very common replacement for meatloaf. We've got beef chili. Okay, very common, but beef and chili. Just take out the beef, add some extra beans into there. Okay. If you do pulled pork tacos, try out jackfruit. Okay, jackfruit is a great substitution for pork tacos. If you maybe make meat lasagna, swap that out for some zucchini lasagna. All right, and our final tip, okay, really try to learn where you can get your plant-based protein from. Okay, I mentioned some of those things in that pyramid, right? So soy foods, okay, soy foods are an excellent complete protein, okay? So things like tofu, tempeh, seitan, right? These things have very high bioavailable amounts of plant-based protein. And when you start to cut out your animal protein intake, you're going to notice that, okay, like my body is not used to getting different types of protein just from plants. Okay, it's used to getting it from a higher bioavailable source of animal protein. So you're going to have to make sure you really include more plant-based versions of protein to still get the amount that you need. Okay, beans, peas, and lentils are also excellent sources of plant-based protein. Okay, hemp seeds are one of the highest protein-containing seeds, as well as pumpkin seeds. And then quinoa, oats, barley, buckwheat, these are also grains that you can start to incorporate that can help you to, enhance some of your plant-based protein intake. So I already talked about quite a bit of information. I hope to see that we're going to have quite a bit of questions after this. So just to summarize some of the things that we discussed today, really a whole food plant-based diet can support your survivorship. And we know that that can support survivorship because of its high content of colorful fruits, vegetables, and fiber content, okay? We know that antioxidants and phytochemicals are found in whole plant foods, okay? They're also found in herbs and spices, and they can help prevent this damage that occurs to our DNA or our cells, okay? This in turn can also reduce our risk of recurrence and support cardiovascular health. So getting those colors is essential in the diet, okay? And we know that adding more plants, just in general, as we saw from the research, can support our long-term health, and it can reduce our risk of all-cause mortality. That sounds pretty good to me. I don't know if I want to die early, right? That sounds pretty good. So these are some of the references from my presentation. The top there, you'll see the American Institute for Cancer Research website. They have a lot of wonderful tools and tips and information on there. They also have a lot of recipes, okay? And then there were some of my sources for some of the information that I shared. For anybody that is interested in meeting with a dietitian, okay, please feel free to call this phone number, or you can reach out via the website. We offer one-on-one consultations, okay? So please seek this out if you are interested. And thank you for your time. I will take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marissa. I'll go one by one. So there was a question about the slides. So this workshop is being recorded. Thank you, Marissa. I have included the emails for CSELA and CSE South Bay. You're also more than welcome to contact your point person at your affiliate, but I would just give them a couple days so I can share this recording with them. So first question, in general, how do you know which fish are safe? And specifically, I've heard contradictory things about salmon, wild salmon versus farm raised. Will you please clarify if wild salmon is better or not than farm raised salmon?
Great question. So a wonderful resource that I recommend looking at is called seafoodwatch.org. Okay, I can type that in the chat box as well, but seafoodwatch.org. And this is put out by the Monterey Bay Aquarium every year, and they offer consumer guides, okay? So based on where you live in the United States, they tell you some of the better sources that are safe, lower mercury levels, ones that are also more sustainable, so not as damaging to the environment. I think this is a kind of a complicated topic, and it's very difficult to really learn some of how our food system is structured. But generally speaking, farm raised is not as ideal for certain foods, or certain fish, but it can be for others. And again, it just has a lot to do with how they manage their feed and the impact on the environment as well. Generally, wild caught is better across the board, but you'll see on the consumer guide that sometimes that can vary based on region. Okay, so and where the fish is coming from specifically. So I think that could also be a really complicated topic and a long topic to discuss, but generally speaking, wild caught is better. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And then for the food pyramid where you added the fish, is that a specific title where you could Google like food pyramid something to get that specific picture?
Yeah, so I used a little bit of my discretion and some of my background, understanding what I wanted to assure was present in the food pyramid. But I did a whole food plant-based pyramid. That's what I searched. And then I added some of the fish. And then at the top there, it did include some things for vegetarians.
Wonderful, thank you. And for those, this is being recorded, so you can always get the recording and take a picture of that food pyramid as well. How to deal with the anti-nutrients in veggies and fruit?
Yeah, so anti-nutrients, this is a sort of been something that has been perpetuated by the carnivore diet, fiends and the keto diet people that unfortunately, is really convoluted and has confused a lot of people. So if anti-nutrients were of huge concern, we would see a lot more deficiencies in this population. And we don't, right? We don't. We know that the concept, so an anti-nutrient essentially means that one compound that exists in a plant also prevents some sort of absorption of another nutrient that is also found in the same plant. For example, spinach contains both calcium and oxalate. Okay, calcium can bind to oxalate to prevent oxalate's absorption. And we think about this sometimes because we want that in relation to preventing kidney stones, right? Some people can get oxalate kidney stones. But if we were to really reduce our intake and reduce this concept of anti-nutrients to everything, we wouldn't absorb anything, right? So the whole concept of anti-nutrients in plants is really moot and completely irrelevant. So we know that eating enough plants, clearly across research across the board, is something that is beneficial for health and essential to get all of these nutrients.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. She put in the link for the checklist for the 30 plants per week that you talked about. That's a good resource. And then there was a resource from EPA.gov about fish and shellfish, choosing which is the best ones to choose. Next question. Any suggested websites for plant-based recipes, or will Google do it?
Yeah, so Forks Over Knives is a great resource for plant-based recipes. I found another one as well not too long ago. It was called Plant-Based and Broke. So it was supposed to be for, if you're trying to eat plant-based on a lower budget or lower cost, right? To lower your cost. So that's a good one. Those are two ones that I really highly recommend. There's also Love and Lemons. Okay, that's another resource as well. I can put some of those in the chat box. Great.
There's a comment up here about Instagram has a lot of great plant-based recipes. You can follow a few plant-based / vegan hashtags. Just watch out for content processed food.
Yeah, so the social media and Instagram can be very beneficial, but for every sort of good recipe or for every sometimes good post, you have 100 other terrible things, and you have a lot of people that are sharing information on social media that are not, you know, under by any circumstance, experts, by anybody who really have background in some of these things. Now, recipes, you don't really have to worry too much about that. We don't worry too much about recipes being fact checked. I think that that's not something that needs to be fact checked. Really, the main concern is that the perpetuation of certain information from people about, you know, scaring people into not eating plants because of this concept of anti-nutrients, or that only animal products are the thing to eat. And, you know, it's just not the case. And we are seeing actually an increase in rates of colorectal cancer. And I think that this is this is an increase because people aren't getting plants, right? We saw that fiber was found in plants and it is not found in any animal product. And some of the animal byproducts that are produced as a result of, you know, metabolism in our GI tract, we need fiber to help eliminate waste and to help remove all of these products that occur as a result of that. So, you know, there is definitely a connection to not getting enough fiber and GI health in the diet. So there's also plenty of factual information that shows fiber can lower cholesterol. And cholesterol is eliminated again through our intestines, right? So if we don't consume enough fiber, oftentimes we have elevated cholesterol that can impact our cardiovascular health, right? So, you know, plants definitely have the vitamins, the minerals, the fiber, the things that we need to support our overall health, not only GI, but also cardiovascular, as well as reducing risk of any sort of cancer recurrence.
Oh, thank you, Tom and Angie, for putting in another resource. Next question, what about eating organic plants versus non-organic plants? Any cancer studies regarding this?
Yes. So as far as, you know, I saw something on this not too long ago, but I'm not able to recall specifically the study or the information on that. But there is no proof that organic foods are better or worse than conventional. Both require pesticides. Either way, you should be washing your fruits and vegetables to remove any sort of pesticides, microbes, and things like that. So as far as research when it comes to cancer and organic foods, it's definitely there. Like I said, I'm not able to recall some of those things at this point, but I would not discourage you from eating vegetables or fruits that are from conventional versus organic if it means that you're going to eat more, right? We just need to eat more plants.
Thank you. What are vegetarian sources of calcium and vitamin D?
Good question. So vegetarian sources of vitamin D, unfortunately, there really aren't that many. Mushrooms is the only source, but we also have fortified foods. So there's vitamin D that's been added into, if you do consume dairy products, it has been added into dairy products. And if you can, it is actually selectively added into eggs as well at times. But mushrooms are the only source that contain D2. And then if you want to completely avoid any sort of animal products, the sun is going to give you the vitamin D that you need. What would the calcium was, I believe, the next question. Calcium is found again in leafy greens. Beans contain calcium. It's also in fortified beverages as well. So it's been added to orange juice. It's also been added into fortified milks, like plant-based milk. So like almond milk, soy milk sometimes too as well. Tofu is a source of calcium. So there are options there as well.
Thank you. Can you provide examples of which plants can provide more protein and the quantity?
Yeah, so in towards the back half of this presentation, tip number 4, I mentioned plant-based sources of protein. So tofu, right? So if you look at extra firm tofu, about 3 ounces of extra firm tofu gives you about 9 grams of protein. If you have a half a cup of really any bean, so it could be a soybean, a pinto bean, a black bean, a lentil, a half a cup of beans gives you about 8 to 9 grams of protein as well. A half a cup of oatmeal will provide you with about 5 grams of protein. Hemp seeds, I believe it's 3 tablespoons, provides you with about 10 grams of protein. And then pumpkin seeds, I want to say a quarter of a cup will give you 13 grams approximately. Let's see, quinoa, about 1 cup of quinoa will give you about 8 to 12 grams of protein, I believe. So those are some of the things I can recall off the top of my head.
Wow, great memory. When eating plant proteins, don't we need to add grains to make complete proteins?
Great question. Yeah. So this is a complementary protein. So there was information a while ago about choosing the right foods to pair together. So I believe it was grains and beans, and then there's also grains and nuts. And I think you can do grains or beans and certain vegetables. I can't remember the exact pairings, but this was because not all plants contain high content of specific amino acids that we require. So animal protein does contain all 9 essential amino acids, making it very easy and bioavailable to get all of the protein that we need. Plants, so grains contain, like, let's just say 4 or 5 of certain amino acids, and then beans might contain 3 to 4, right? So to find those together, the idea is to complement them and have them at specific meals to make sure that you're getting all 9 essential amino acids. Now, our amino acid or protein turnover is actually within a 24-hour period. So you don't technically have to consume these foods at the same time, but you can. It's certainly beneficial to do that for a variety of reasons, satiety and things like that. But as long as you're consuming the variety of these plant-based foods within a 24-hour period, you should be getting the appropriate amino acid profile that you need to form complete proteins.
Thank you. You mentioned the benefit of soy products. Has the literature finally confirmed that breast cancer survivors do not have to avoid soy? When I was diagnosed in 2000, the literature was quote unquote conflicted.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The literature has been shown that it is beneficial to consume soy products. So if you go to the AICR's website, okay, I recommend going there, going to where it says cancer prevention, and then you'll go under diet, and then they have specific food recommendations, okay? And you can pull it up and it has all of these different foods, and you can click on the food and it can tell you what the beneficial compound is in that food and how it fights cancer. So I definitely recommend looking at that, and you will find that there are some soy products on there. Okay, so we say 1 to 3 servings of soy is safe. So, 1 serving of soy would be about 3 ounces of tofu, half a cup of edamame, and then 1 cup of soy milk would be considered 1 serving. So we usually say 1 to 3 servings is safe.
Thank you. What about spirulina and chloroplast for protein and nutrition?
Let's see, I'm going to scroll to that. So I think it's spirulina. Is that what it was?
That makes more sense. Yes, spirulina
okay.
and chloroplast.
Okay, sorry, I'm scrolling up to it too because there's quite a bit information in the chat. Yeah, so spirulina and then chloroplast. As far as protein, so I think spirulina does contain, a small amount of protein. It's and chloroplast, I think, again, these are things that are extracted, from plants, and they're shown to be, beneficial for obtaining these antioxidants. I always say, consume these things as close to their natural form as possible, right? Because that is where the bioavailability exists. That is where, it was created this way, or it grew this way, right? If you're obtaining these things from, a supplement or a powder, there's really no for sure certainty that not only that this supplement or powder is even containing what it says that it contains, but also that it is truly causing any sort of benefit, right? So the supplement industry is not regulated, and it actually can be very, very dangerous for many people. And I could scoop up dirt in my backyard, and I could put it into a capsule and I could sell it to you. And I could say it contains this, 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 and this. So it's really not super safe. So if you consume these things, I definitely recommend, again, getting them through the whole food sources.
Thank you. Are dairy products detrimental in any way?
Dairy products are only detrimental if you have a dairy allergy or if you have lactose intolerance. There are now dairy products that contain lactase and can break up the lactose sugar for you. So if you are lactose intolerant, that can be possible. But if you have an actual allergy to dairy, yes, it is detrimental. Otherwise, there is no necessarily for certain evidence that dairy is harmful. Dairy contains a lot of calcium, and for women who are postmenopausal, we need about 1,200 or more, 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium per day to reduce our risk of osteoporosis, right? So dairy products can be a very easy and simple bioavailable source of protein. So dairy is not harmful, but it is also not essential. Okay, so I do like to say that, right? It is also not required for consumption, but it has benefits.
Thank you. Any thoughts on probiotic use to help gut microbiome?
Yeah, there's a lot of research still that they're garnering on this. So at Cedars, there's a woman, Susan Devkota, and she is one of the leaders in their studies for IBD, so irritable bowel disorders, irritable bowel disease, so things like Crohn's and things like that. So she is studying the impact of probiotics and how these can affect our gut microbes. The challenge with over-the-counter probiotics is it has a lot to do with the strains that they provide, how much. So you'll see the CFU, the colonization factors, right? How many of these are there? So the strain, the diversity, as well as the number really does matter. So there is some research definitely that supports that it can be positive on gut health. But overall, like I mentioned, the strongest factor that influences gut health is plant diversity and fiber. And that is something that you can guarantee and see in all research.
Thoughts on supplementing vegetarian diet with B12?
Great question. So B12 is primarily found in meat products and animal products. If you follow a more strict vegan diet, okay, if you are completely devoid really of any of those animal products whatsoever, then supplementing with B12 is recommended. Nutritional yeast is one of the easiest things that you can incorporate with if you do have that. If you are following a vegetarian diet, though, with some sporadic intakes of, meats, other sources of dairy, or if you do have the occasional fish, you're likely getting enough B12. And then our liver also has the capacity to store this vitamin if necessary. So if you do choose to supplement, you probably don't need to supplement as much as you might think. You could do like a weekly dose if you felt like you needed to. But genuinely, you can also get it from nutritional yeast. It's actually very high in B12.
Thank you. Eating the whole fruit and vegetable is best in an ideal world. If we want to add to our number of fruits and vegetables on a day when we might be shy, is it okay to use a powdered source?
Unfortunately, I discourage the use of those powdered sources, mostly because they don't. They're providing you with the quote unquote vitamins, right, that you might be getting from the fruit. And again, they're likely not tested, regulated at all whatsoever. So you're probably not even getting what it says that you're getting. So you're thinking of like, the reds and greens from, Vega Sport or things like that, right? So I would say that the supplementation in a powdered source is likely not really even garnering the same benefit as the fruit, right? If you are still a little bit low on your fruit intake, again, think about it across the course of the week. Maybe consider doing, a mixed fruit cup or making yourself some like a fruit smoothie, right? Something where you can get a mixture of those different fruits and vegetables and save it, right? And have it over the course of the whole week versus having the powdered source.
Thank you. Can you recommend foods high in fiber?
Yes. So high fiber foods are going to be beans. Okay, so I think a half a cup of beans provides you with about 7 to 8 grams of fiber. Okay, the total amount of fiber that is recommended per day is 25 to 30 grams. Okay, and this is per minimum. So, a half a cup of beans a day will get you to 7 to 8 grams just right there. Other high sources of fiber include quinoa, broccoli, and cauliflower, kale. We also have, did I say oats? Oats is also another one. And then high fiber fruits are going to be things like pears, and then berries. Okay, so the blackberries are the highest as far as the berry goes. Then strawberries, then raspberries, and blueberries are actually more on the lower end.
Thank you. Can you give some examples of foods with antioxidants to incorporate daily or weekly?
Every single fruit and vegetable has an antioxidant associated with it. Okay, so the best one though, I would say blueberries are extremely high in antioxidants. Cherries, pomegranates, all of those are in season right now. As far as the vegetables, every single vegetable has some sort of antioxidant associated with it. Okay, so carrots, tomatoes, cucumbers, asparagus, broccoli, spinach, all of them.
How wonderful. Some people experience gas when eating beans. Any advice?
Yeah. So that one is, so beans are what we call a they're technically like a high gas producing agent, right? So you can always start smaller, okay? And typically if you experience a high amount of gas, we start with a smaller portion of it, right? Because your gut bacteria has to get used to it if you're not used to eating a lot of beans. Okay, so say start small, right? Start with a couple tablespoons, even. You can add it to your salad. Those kinds of things are easy things to do. If you are doing canned beans, we just recommend rinsing them. Okay, so you pop the can open, rinse it off, get rid of all of that extra stuff that's in there, the juice that's in there. Rinse it off really well under cold water. If you're making your own beans, if they're dry, I think some people have recommended to like soak them a little bit overnight. That is supposed to help with reducing some of the gas producing agent. But you'll also leach out some of the beneficial nutrients in there when you do that. So I would say that, a canned and then, rinsing it off is a good thing to do, or just starting a little bit smaller.
Thank you. A few more questions. Please provide some food advice for people who suffer from acid reflux.
Okay. Yeah. So high fat and like fried foods, those things are going to really give reflux. Some people are sensitive to even coffee, tea, and alcohol definitely will give you reflux. All kinds of alcohol. Carbonated beverages can also give reflux, so we say avoid that.
Thank you. I heard dairy can cause inflammation.
So it will cause inflammation if you are allergic to it and if you have lactose intolerance, right? So some people do certainly have other sensitivities to dairy, okay? If you find that it does promote some level of eczema, don't eat it, right? Quite simple as that. There is no evidence to suggest that it causes inflammation in all populations, but that we can say this about every food, right? If somebody has a sensitivity to nuts, to seeds, right? We can say that that is going to cause some level of inflammation, so don't eat it, right? To widespread make a claim that this one thing is fully inflammatory across the board, we need evidence for that. There is evidence that it does exist in specific populations, like in specific people, particularly if you have lactose intolerance, right? Or if you have an allergy to dairy. So we recommend don't eat it if you have any of those issues.
Wonderful. What about protein powders?
Yeah, so protein powders are also not regulated. They are considered a food. Some of them have been tested by third-party agencies to assure that what is in them is what you are getting. So I definitely recommend looking at some of those. So if you have an NSF, BSCG, or a consumer labs certification, okay, then that particular product was tested by one of those third parties, okay? NSF stands for National Sport Federation. BSCG, I can't remember exactly what that stands for. Consumer Labs. These are all third-party agencies that a company will send their product to test to make sure that it is contains what it actually does say it contains on the label. So protein powders, they can be very useful in obtaining protein. So if you are transitioning, from having more animal products into consuming more plants, and maybe you have high protein needs. Again, this could be because you're athletic, you exercise a lot, which everybody should. You might need higher protein needs, okay? Or if you're an athlete or you have a child that's an athlete. So protein powders can be very useful to meet your protein needs. But that being said, they are, still processed, refined versions of, the natural source. But they can be very useful in meeting protein needs if necessary.
Thank you. Last question. What is the best method for washing fruits and vegetables?
Water. Yeah, just through water. So some people use salad spinners. Other people just put it into, a colander and water. Berries, you can distress them, right? So maybe put them in a colander and you kind of shake them up through water, but we usually say just rinsing them off. Some people use, vinegar, baking soda. I wouldn't say one method is greater than another. Do whatever works best for you. But generally, water is just fine.
Wonderful.